Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know the last session on the last day takes a little bit of dedication, so we appreciate you all coming in, and hopefully you'll enjoy our talk, which is on rethinking recruiting, effective hiring practices to close the skills gap in cybersecurity. Before we get started, my lawyers have informed me I have to recite this statement, which is the opinions that are expressed here are solely our own and do not express the views or opinions of our employers. So let's get started. Who am I? So my name is Lillian Tang, and if you'd read my bio online or as part of the RSA materials, you'll notice that I've been in cyber for quite a while. I started out first as a cyber special agent, and then I pivoted to being a government contractor, and then I joined Yahoo as one of the Yahoo Paranoids, and then finally here today as Senior Director of Cyber Intelligence at Capital One. Throughout my career in all of these roles, I've participated in the recruitment process. So I've helped recruit, I've helped look at resumes, I've been a hiring manager, I've been a candidate, obviously, as well. And so in all of these roles, one of the things I notice is I've often brought the perspective of being an only, where I might be the only person in the room of a particular identity. So for example, I've sometimes been the only woman, which means I'm facing the glass ceiling, the invisible barrier to advancement that women face in the workplace. I've sometimes been the only person of Asian identity, thus facing the bamboo ceiling, which is the barrier that excludes a lot of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders from executive positions. Another identity that I've brought to this experience is as a caregiver or as a parent, and this specifically a mother. And this is called the maternal wall. And so this is a perception or bias that impacts mothers or women who are pregnant to be viewed as less competent or less dedicated to their jobs. One of the things that I've realized throughout these experiences is I no longer want to be this only. I want there to be all of these perspectives represented in this process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Audra.
All right, thanks Lillian. So my name's Audra Streetman, and I am a security strategist at Splunk, and I'm a member of SURGE, which is Splunk's strategic security research team. And I've been at Splunk for about a year and a half. Before that, though, I was a journalist for about a decade. And this photo here up on the left is my first job out of college. I was a reporter in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I'd actually never heard of Fort Wayne until I got accepted for the job, and then I moved out there, worked there for about 3 years, and it was a great job. I was a multimedia journalist, meaning I shot, wrote, and edited all of my stories, and I eventually anchored the evening news in Indiana. I then moved to Palm Springs, California, where I was a morning anchor. I worked overnights, producing and anchoring the morning show there. I then moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where I produced several different newscasts. And it was around 2018, when I was nearing the end of my contract in Louisville, that I started thinking about my next career move. And the next logical step for me was a newsroom management job. And I started thinking about it, and I wasn't terribly excited about the idea. Which, you want to be excited about your next job move, right? So I started thinking, well, I definitely need a change. I'd been working overnights for several years. I'm not sure if anyone here has worked an overnight shift. Anyone? Raise a hand. It's tough. I mean, some people thrive on that schedule, but I did not. I never quite got used to it. So I was definitely ready for a change. And I started to think, well, do I want to make a major change, like a career change? So I just started thinking about that, and it was actually around that time where I met my friend and mentor, Matt Kingstone. And I'm going to talk a bit about Matt in a minute and how his mentorship was just critical to my decision to make a career change, and I would not be here today if I hadn't met him. But ultimately, I did decide to make a career change into cybersecurity, which really wasn't on my radar up until that point. And I'm really glad I did. And so I'll talk a bit about mentorship and also the job application process, some of the challenges that I faced, especially with entry-level cybersecurity positions. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Lillian for a bit more about the job posting at Splunk that I applied to, and a little bit about how that job posting, how it was different from other entry-level jobs in cybersecurity.
All right, thank you. So who are you? Who are you in this audience? If you're involved in cybersecurity hiring process in any way, you're probably captured by some of these experiences. We each play our part bringing people into cyber, whether we're a practitioner, whether we're a mentor, whether we're a leader that hires people, whether we're a candidate, whether we participate in interviewing. Basically, this talk is for you. One of the things that you undoubtedly know is job descriptions are the first thing anyone looking into your organization or looking to break into cyber at your organization will see. And so you have to make them as enticing as possible for most candidates. But unfortunately, in cybersecurity, we've got some really terrible habits, and it has resulted in us closing the door for a lot of candidates, vice opening them. And so today, we're gonna go over how to create a more inclusive job description, rethinking what you're looking for in a candidate. And we know that a lot of our story or the guidance may be stuff that you've heard in the past, but we hope that you can at least take away one idea to implement at the level that you are in, wherever you are in this particular process. I also think that our talk is particularly unique because this is one of the few times you will get to see the end-to-end story. So you will see how the job description was created, where we pipelined it, the reaction we got to it, and then the amazing person who actually got the job. This is something that I don't think we see a lot of in cybersecurity. We'll see the individual pieces, but this is gonna be that whole story. So we'll go ahead and get started. So why does it matter? Well, the cybersecurity landscape, as you know, cybersecurity is one of the very few fields where there's consistently negative or 0% unemployment. So what does that mean? That means that there's oftentimes many more jobs than there are people to actually do those jobs. And so according to an IC² cyber workforce study that was conducted in 2022, that gap was identified as 3.4 million people globally. That's 3.4 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs. And so that shows to us that we need to do some work to get people in those seats. And so the Great Resignation, which started in 2021, 2022, it may be slowing now, but multiple shifts in the workplace have occurred based on that. And so according to a survey that Indeed conducted of about 5,000 US professionals, over 80% believe that work needs to provide more than a paycheck. Over 80% report that work impacts their happiness at home. And by the fact that we're working from home and essentially living at work, that tracks. Over 80% also believe it's important to find a company that actually cares about how you feel. And so that imperative to create a supportive culture or psychological safety is incredibly important. And especially in cyber, where there is a lot of competition for talent. That is a lot of things to consider when you are hiring. Additionally, within cybersecurity, we face dedicated human adversaries. Throughout my career, I've faced a variety of these, and this can be your government-backed attacker, the person who is assigned to, their 9 to 5 is to break into your organization or to target specific users. This could be financially motivated actors, people who are in it for a quick buck. This could be people who are coerced, honestly, into being a cyber adversary. And so these are people who maybe live in a repressive regime, have been caught by said regime and converted to being a government-backed attacker. It could be people who are economically marginalized and live in a part of the world where being a cyber adversary is your only way of putting food on the table. And so within cybersecurity, we have to understand these perspectives. So I will share a story from early on in my career that kind of aligns with this. And so I was working with a network defender who had come to me and said, hey, I'm really worried. The adversary that we track, they've gone dark, and I don't know why. I've checked our sensors, I've checked our detections, everything is working as intended, but I can't find them anymore. So I've spent my career working in something called cyber threat intelligence. And one of the things we do in cyber threat intelligence is called pattern of life analysis. And we had conducted this for this particular adversary and realized that they were based out of a mainland Chinese time zone. And so in this particular instance, we took a look at the calendar, and surely enough, it was Chinese New Year. And so this adversary was on a holiday. And so understanding the human behind the attacks is incredibly important. On the other side, we also have to understand the vulnerable populations as well as the victims of these attacks. These could be groups like journalists, it could be civil society, it could be human rights activists, it could be marginalized communities. And it's important because these are often the canaries in the coal mines. They're the first ones targeted, they're the ones that are the most vulnerable, or they're the ones that see these things from a different perspective that you may not see. And so I'll share another story. There was a running app that used to publicly post everybody's, the route that you would take. When this was released, a bunch of women and privacy experts kind of put their hands up and said, hey, whoa, wait a minute. This has privacy implications. It could be used potentially for stalkers. And of note, the National Center for Domestic Violence here in the US has stated that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 19 men have been stalked in their lifetime. And so, they said, hey, can you reconsider doing this publicly? And the app kind of just blew them off, didn't really do anything about it until the US government intervened, because you know what else was happening? Sensitive military locations were being disclosed because military members and their routes were being posted. And so this goes to show how those vulnerable populations and the concerns that they have align with national security. And so how do we get started in this landscape?
Hey, do you want to make a difference fighting bad guys and making 6 figures? Well, do we have the job for you? You don't have to be Iron Man. You can work in cybersecurity. Hell yeah. The U.S. government estimates a labor shortage of about 400,000 people over the next few years in this industry. Here are the 3 simple things that you need to fill these jobs. 1, you need to have 10 years of related job experience. 2, you need to have multiple accredited certifications. And 3, most importantly, you gotta be a rock star. Does this sound like you?
No, that doesn't sound like me at all.
Awesome. Come on down and apply at entrylevelcybersecurityjobs.com. We're waiting. It's time to sell drugs.
I hope you enjoyed that video, so I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tangent. This is my good friend and colleague, Stephen Asifo. He is a comic, and actually he's a cybersecurity professional working in governance, risk, and compliance, based right here in San Francisco. If you want to follow him, his social is @AsifoSays. He's hilarious and has tons of cybersecurity comedy available for you. So I heard a lot of laughs, but raise your hand if this video resonated with you in some way. Yeah, exactly. I know it has for me because we've seen this phenomenon time and time again. And it's highlighted in this tweet as well, these unrealistic requirements when it comes to job descriptions. And so it highlights the tension that's there, like this concept you have to pay your dues, you have to work in IT to be able to pivot to cybersecurity. Or the hiring manager that actually doesn't take the time to be like, what does my entry-level role look like? The organization that maybe doesn't have the culture to grow and support and retain talent. Or even those who are in the hiring process who are so swamped that they just are cutting and pasting job descriptions. And so the other piece of this is a bit of psychology, which is, cybersecurity trains us to be risk adverse. And so this manifests in hiring as well. So are we gonna hire the wrong person? Are they not gonna fit in? Is it not gonna work out? Are we not gonna hire quickly enough and this headcount is gonna be taken for other business needs? And so underpinning some of this as well is a bias, and we're gonna talk about bias here in this presentation. But this bias is also experience bias. What got me here in my career is the path that everybody else has to take. And that's just human nature. So what you need to do, honestly, to break that bias is to just create rigorous and structured interview processes and job description guidelines to make sure we're getting as many people as possible into this field. There we go. We got through the video part. That's the tricky tech part of this. So what do? This is kind of my advice here. And so the first thing you need to recognize, applying for jobs is sometimes scary and really hard work. Some people read job descriptions and what they're looking for is the first opportunity to nope out of it, to say, hey, I'm not applying for this. Do not give them that opportunity. You need to write your job description to be as enticing as possible and not scary. And one of the ways you do this is don't do a laundry list job description. Keep your bullet points to a minimum and try and avoid as much as possible things like benchmarks, so like the 3+, 5+, 7+ years of experience. Some other slightly more nuanced considerations when you're writing job descriptions. So economic barriers to entry. So there are a lot of roles out there that are like requiring an advanced degree, a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, multiple certifications. We saw that in Asifo's video. What is challenging about those is that that doesn't enable those that are economically marginalized to apply for these types of roles. Now, I do want to call out, especially in the tech industry, I know that a lot of people use H-1B visa workers. And as part of the H-1B process, you are required to have a bachelor's degree. And in some companies, that means that entire family needs to have a bachelor's degree. And that's fine. What you need to do is you need to recognize that that's the case and try and put other guidelines and parameters to try and mitigate that. Another thing to keep in mind when you're writing job descriptions is what else are you requiring? Are you requiring a writing sample? Are you requiring an additional test? Do you want them to put together a deck? Because this could unintentionally preclude people who are caregivers. And so I'll share a story here. I had a friend of mine who is the mother of 2 young children. She found a job that she loved and was really qualified for. But one of the things that was incredibly challenging is they required her to take an online test all at once that took 60 to 90 minutes. Now, I don't know if you're a parent out there or if you're a mom of 2 young kids, like finding 10 minutes to use the bathroom is hard enough, much less 60 to 90 minutes to take an online test. And so she ended up not applying. And one of the ways that this could have been mitigated was compensate her for her time. She could have hired a babysitter to take this, and it was a small amount of money that that company would have had to outlay. And so other things to consider. When you're looking at candidates, look for somebody who's a culture add, not a culture fit. So this is somebody who is different and not the same skill set over and over again. I'm going to use a baking analogy for this one. So I've been told in the past that I make an amazing apple pie. And one of the reasons I like to think that this apple pie is so delicious is because when you look at an apple pie recipe, it has pounds and pounds of apples. Like it says, 5 pounds, 9 pounds, however many pounds of apples. And one of the things I found is if you use one kind of apple, the pie tastes kind of flat. It's kind of homogeneous. And so one thing that I've always done is I've used a variety of apples. So I find ones that are crisp. I find ones that are sweet. I find ones that are soft. And what this does is it creates a better flavor profile and a better pie eating experience, I would like to say. And so when you're hiring, think about that. What is the type of apple I don't have in this recipe? And try and hire and include that. The other thing to think about as well is what are the core competencies for this job? And so what is the goal that we're trying to achieve here? And this could be something, it manifests like you must have somebody who knows how to do object-oriented programming, but you may want somebody with a particular language. Distill it down to that core competency. In your job description, show a growth mindset. Like going back to the statistics I cited in the beginning, people want to know that they can be forward-thinking, that there's opportunities for mentorship and growth within this role. And then also importantly, if you can't see yourself in the role, you can't be in the role. And so describe what a typical day looks like. Describe things like what the tasks they would do would be, what things could they do ad hoc, what are some potential collaboration points as well. Try and use you and we language to create more of a conversation here. And so the next part, this is things not to do. And spoiler alert, it's basically remove your biases. And so the first one is to try as best as you can to remove unintended gender bias. And within cybersecurity, there's actually a bunch of words that we use that tend to skew masculine. So for example, threat hunting. But we're not going to stop using the word threat hunting. So what you do is just take that into consideration and try and balance out the rest of your job description with other words. There are multiple tools that you can do that are going to help you with this. So Ryan, I'm going to point him out right there, who is the person who wrote this job description, used a bunch of tools to help here. So he used Grammarly and Textio. But there's a lot of augmented writing tools out there that can help you root out these biases. There's also a lot of nonprofit projects, like there's one called the Gender Decoder by Kat Matfield that can help you identify this type of language. The other things to remove is try and remove kind of the age bias and the culture bias. So you saw that in Asifo's video again, like you gotta be a rock star. Well, that has some potential culture bias there as well. Other examples are like young and energetic, party atmosphere. One of the ones that I particularly don't like is work hard, play hard. Like, I work hard and then I want to take a nap. I don't want to play hard. So, just be aware of some of these things that are potentially pop up. The other thing as well is to avoid extreme modifiers. So like best of the best, world class. Because what happens here is there are oftentimes candidates that are very humble, and the humble could be a result of either a cultural or a societal modesty norm. And if you have best of the best, things like that, they may not opt in. And so try and use words like innovative or, collaborative to entice these types of candidates. And so, does this work? Heck yeah, it works. And so what you can see here is the engagement that we had from this job description, and it was hugely successful. So, Ryan's post on LinkedIn received over 20,000 views. On Twitter, it was over 170,000 Twitter impressions for a job. A cybersecurity TikToker named Kyle picked up this job and made a video about it, and it got over 11,000 views. And so, social media engagement is cool and all, but what did that result in? It resulted in 176 applications over the course of, I think it was a week. It was so much that the recruiters actually had to shut down the role to be able to process all of their resumes. And one of the things that Ryan graciously shared with me when we went through this was that it seemed like it was a diverse slate. It seemed gender balanced, which he had not observed previously, and to have a lot of diverse candidates. So in addition to all of this social media stuff, we did some things on the back end as well. We took a look at where these roles were being advertised. So again, not just using LinkedIn, using some other places. And I'm gonna share with you some great places that you can look to do this. And so the US Department of Interior, their Office of Civil Rights, actually has a listing of minority-serving institutions. And so this is gonna be your historically Black colleges and universities, your Hispanic-serving institutions, your AAPI-serving institutions, as well as your tribal and indigenous colleges and universities. And of course, there's tons of nonprofits in this space, and so I'm just gonna rattle off a bunch. Hopefully it'll be recorded, but there's groups like Moms in Tech, the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu, Women in Security and Privacy, the Diana Initiative, Black Girls Hack, Afrotech, Black in Tech, Black Cybersecurity Association, Techaria, let's see, Out in Tech, Lesbians Who Tech, the Rural Technology Foundation. Like, there are all of these organizations that are trying to get more perspectives into this field. Additionally, because we're here to talk about reskilling, there's organizations doing that as well. And so you have the SANS New to Cyber. They're trying to get people to move into cyber from other careers. They also run immersion academies for women and veterans. Again, lots of nonprofits in this space as well. So there's Hiring Our Heroes, there's VetSec. There's an organization called Path Forward, which is helping caregivers. And there's an unprecedented amount of caregivers who left the working field during COVID. But this organization works to get caregivers back into the workforce. There's another organization called Upwardly Global. They work and provide career advancement, career placement, and career advice for immigrants and refugees here in the US. And there's also an organization called the Last Mile Foundation. And this is an organization that helps formerly incarcerated people enter the workforce. And so this is going to take me back to a little bit about core competencies. Like, this is why that's so important, because people in those roles have the core competencies to go to cybersecurity. Flexibility, adaptability, willingness to learn. In my career, I started my career in host-based forensics. You know, maybe this is controversial, I don't think it is, but host-based forensics is basically dead. And so what I had to show in my career was to kind of, how do I pivot? How do I learn new things? And so this is the approach we have to take for people reskilling into the role. And there's a lot of what some people would say atypical roles that would be great for cyber. And so anybody who comes from like a medical or scientific background, like, they are problem solvers. They conduct analysis and they solve problems. People from marketing and PR, like, those are the best people possible to translate cyber technical information to a non-cyber audience. Teachers, these are people who learn things so deeply they are able to teach others and communicate that information. And journalists, because they conduct the analysis, they do objective fact-finding, they write a story that communicates it to a wide audience, and they do it under a time crunch. And I think all of us in cyber understand how time crunches work. So I'm gonna pass it over to Audra for her part.
All right, thanks, Lillian. I'll take that. So, and just to point out with that last slide, I think altogether there were about 400 applicants for the Splunk posting, just to put in perspective.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, just all together. I'm not sure when they shut it down, but just for some perspective with that. But here's my perspective from the application process. So I can say unequivocally I would not be in cybersecurity if I did not have a mentor. And this is Matt Kingstone, and yes, I have permission to name him and use his photo. But I met him again when I was in Louisville and really unsure about what I wanted to do next. I felt like I needed a change, but I didn't know what that was. And so when I met Matt, he has actually helped about a dozen people get entry-level jobs in cybersecurity, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, like a dozen people. And I wish we could clone him, because then we could eventually, solve the skills gap. But since that's not possible, I would encourage everyone here today, if you know of anyone or if you meet anyone looking to get into cybersecurity, if you can do what you can to help them, it can make all the difference. I really think that having someone who has done it themselves, who can provide a roadmap and encouragement, can really help get people into this industry, and I think that's one of the missing pieces. So Matt was very encouraging. At first I was like, cybersecurity? That's not anything I had ever considered before. He's like, no, you'd be great at it. Like, with your current job and what you do right now, like, that would be actually a really good fit. Because there are parallels between journalism and cybersecurity, as Lillian mentioned, especially threat intelligence, I've learned, when it comes to communication and writing and being able to convey technical topics to a wide audience. There's a lot of translatable skills. So with Matt's story, he actually was an Army mechanic for a long time and got to the same point that I was at, where he realized he didn't want to do it forever. So he really started from scratch. He started learning networking concepts and getting certifications. I believe Network Plus was his first certification. And then from there, he started out on a help desk. He moved into a SOC position, and then he was a pen tester on a red team, and now he's a consultant. And so that was his career trajectory. And to see someone who really started from scratch, like how I would start from scratch, that really encouraged me and kind of solidified in my mind that this is something I can do. If he can do it, I can do it, right? And so that was crucial for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. But to be clear, this was not an overnight decision. I actually molded over for about 2 years. I ended up taking another job in news in Denver, which is where I'm from. And so I worked there, and this was great because I had a chance to slowly learn about cybersecurity on my own time without any pressure of finding a job right away. And one of the first things I did was Twitter. I just started following people on Twitter. Essentially, I followed everyone Matt followed on Twitter. And I learned a lot from that about what people were talking about, who were people in the industry that were well known and knew what they were talking about. And that was a great place to learn. I also started watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts. A couple that I started with were Darknet Diaries is a great one, especially if you're new to cybersecurity. They explain concepts in a way that you can understand, technical concepts. I also listened to the Cyberwire with Dave Bittner. That was a great podcast for cybersecurity news. And then I also borrowed some cybersecurity study guides from Matt and just kind of slowly started learning on my own. And that was a great introduction. And at that point, I decided, okay, I'm gonna do this. Because I realized as a journalist, I was increasingly covering cybersecurity stories in local news. When I was in Denver, I was covering the ransomware attacks on Colonial Pipeline, Kaseya, JBS. JBS is headquartered in Colorado, so that was a local news story. And as a digital producer, I had the opportunity to pitch stories that I was interested in. And so I had a chance to write about cybersecurity. And that was really what did it for me. And I was like, okay, I am really interested in this. I want to go ahead and go for it. So for anyone in the audience today who's looking to get into cybersecurity, again, I highly recommend joining industry groups and associations. Lillian named off a whole bunch, like the Diana Initiative, Black Girls Code, WESIS, many more. There's so many groups where you can meet people similar to yourself, who have gone through what you're trying to do. And when you meet someone similar to you who has done it, it becomes a lot more attainable in your mind that you can do it. And I think there's a saying, maybe it's overused, about if you can see it, you can be it. It's kind of that same logic. So here's my advice that I learned from my job application experience. And I wish I could say I found a job just like that, but that's not how it happened. There were quite a few applications and quite a few rejections. And sadly, I think that's pretty common for people trying to get their foot in the door. But my advice is to apply anyway. If you see a job posting and you don't meet every single requirement, apply anyway. Don't let that discourage you. I know Lillian's advocating for better job postings, but until that becomes the norm, I highly recommend you apply for a job even if you're not quite sure if you meet the qualifications. My other piece of advice is to reach out to hiring managers. And I actually have a story from this. When I was applying for jobs, before I applied to the job at Splunk, there was one position, and it was a threat intelligence position. And I saw in the job posting that they were looking for someone with a journalism background. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. I'm gonna apply to this job. So I actually looked up the CEO on LinkedIn, and I sent him a message. And I said, hey, I'm a journalist looking to get into cybersecurity. I just applied for this job, and I'd love to learn more about what you're looking for in an applicant. And surprisingly, he responded in just a couple minutes. And he said, hey, here's our hiring manager for the threat intelligence team. He gave me his name. I reached out to him on LinkedIn, said similar intro, talked to him briefly on LinkedIn. And then a couple days later, I got a rejection email from the company. And, sad, but not surprising, right? But then, a day later, I got an email from the recruiter at that company. And he said, hey, there's been a mistake. We actually would like to invite you for an interview. And what happened is the hiring manager for that company did not see my name among the initial list of interviewees. And he asked for the recruiter to reach out and add me for the first round of interviews. So that's how I went through multiple rounds of interviews for that job, is because I reached out directly and I showed my interest in the position. And I was actually a finalist for that position. So it goes to show that it can make a big difference with at least getting the opportunity to interview for jobs when you're still trying to get your foot in the door. And then just a few more tips just from sitting in on interviews and also being interviewed. The biggest one is in cybersecurity, you're going to encounter technical questions. That's just a given. But if you don't know the answer, it's okay. It's better to acknowledge when you don't know the answer instead of trying to stumble through it and pull an answer out of thin air, because I've seen that happen sometimes in interviews. But instead, I would recommend explaining how you would find the answer, because I think that goes to show that you work well on your own, you're able to solve problems, you're critical thinking. And that's a huge part of cybersecurity, because no one in this industry knows everything. A big part of this job is learning as you go, being able to find the answers just throughout the day, right? Being able to search and find what you need. So if you can demonstrate that in an interview, I think that's equally as important. Also come prepared with questions. Interviews go both ways. So I highly recommend taking time before the interview to think about what you want to know about the job. And some ideas for that could be, what's a day in the life? What are my expectations? How is my performance evaluated? You can also ask about the hiring timeline. Those are all fair questions to ask in an interview. And lastly, thank people for their time. Politeness goes a long way. Gratitude, courtesy, it can definitely separate you from other applicants. And so here's just a recap of kind of some of my advice, just if you are on this timeline, what you can do in the next week, 3 months, 6 months. To start, I would recommend building your network on social media. Create a Twitter account, start following people, or a Mastodon account. I think there's another one, Blue Sky, is that another? I haven't created that yet, but The next thing you can do is start being discerning about job postings. Everything that Lillian said is great to keep an eye out for as an applicant as well. When you see job postings that take the time to use inclusive language, that's a green light, and I would pay attention to that when you apply. But if you see a bunch of requirements and you don't meet them, apply anyway. And then reach out to hiring managers, show your interest in the position. When you're in a huge pool of applicants, it really can be the one thing that sets you apart from others. Within the next 6 months, stay persistent. I really think that's my biggest piece of advice for job applicants in this industry, is to just stay persistent. Do not let rejection discourage you, because unfortunately, with the way things are with entry-level jobs that aren't actually entry-level, there's a good chance you might encounter, rejection. And then, of course, continue to build foundational knowledge. So I recommend networking skills. That's where I started with cybersecurity. My manager, Ryan Kovar, right there, gave me a syllabus when I started. Started with networking, Linux skills, security concepts. That's kind of my timeline of what I learned, and that was really helpful. And then just remember, if you're coming from a different career changers bring their own superpower. And so just because you think you might lack technical qualifications, those can be taught, but you do bring your own skill set, whether that be communication skills or project management. There's a whole host of different abilities and skills that you can bring to the table.
Oops, I went too far. So for those who have any role in the hiring process, so don't let this just be a hiring manager problem, like you have a role to play and you can help here. And so the next step that you should take in the next week, and I call it step 1 because you're not gonna finish doing this in a week, but review the job descriptions for your organization and find opportunities to improve. Like the things that I highlighted before, there are certain guardrails you might have to adhere to, but there's also other opportunities that you can likely leverage to make that job description better. Also start asking, where are we advertising our jobs? If it's just LinkedIn, you should probably do something else, in addition to LinkedIn, but expand those opportunities. If there are particular talent pools you're trying to tap into, reach out to those pools. These candidates exist. The next step you should take, or in the next 3 months, what you should do is draft and create a repeatable process. So this is about breaking biases. So create a guidance document for how you want job descriptions to land. Create a guidance document of this is where we want to advertise our roles. Create a guidance document of how we want to conduct our interview process, just to break some of those human biases, like the experience bias. And then within 6 months, or step 3, this is basically lather, rinse, repeat. You just look at your process. See, is it working? Do you have metrics you can look at that you can measure the success? And then refine it going forward. What lessons did you learn, and how can we incorporate these going forward? And then share those lessons with the rest of them, especially if they're super successful, because that's one of the reasons why this talk exists, is because Ryan and I were talking about how successful his role was, and this is the amazing person that got hired for that role. So that concludes our talk. Imagine that there is an any questions slide here, because we're open to accepting questions at this point. So thank you.
Any questions?
I'll get kicked off with one. So, Audra, it's awesome and it's amazing that you've joined the Splunk team, but I'm sure it hasn't been easy, right? That there are definitely barriers when you switch careers. And so I'm curious, for anyone who's looking to transfer into cybersecurity, once they get that first job, what advice would you give them about when they hit a roadblock or a barrier, or they feel like, I don't know this command? Like, any advice on getting over those challenges?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a huge component of feeling, especially when you're new to this, it can be very intimidating. And I would say just push through anyway. Like when I was studying for certifications, I would get really nervous. I actually failed my first certification attempt for Network Plus.
We all fail our first
It was
one.
a hard test, okay? I tried to learn in a month and a half, and it was a lot. So I would say it's good to acknowledge your failures too, because I think that, helps other people know that it does happen. But I would say push through anyway, and don't let anyone discourage you, because I did have a lot of people that I met when I was applying for jobs saying I wouldn't hire you. They were very direct about it, and it was discouraging, but I refused to actually believe that. I thought, oh, well, you just don't know me well enough. You know, you kind of have to have that inner confidence to know that, like, I deserve to be here, I deserve to have this job. And if you have that mindset going into it and you just continue, you'll get through it, and you'll have your own failures along the way. Maybe you don't get the certification on the first attempt, but you will the next time. And so I guess that's my advice.
One thing I'll call out that you mentioned actually during our talking points is your leader, Ryan, created a syllabus, and that is incredibly important. Organizations have to set people up for success, and having a guideline, these are the skills I expect you to learn. Here is the tool to go learn said skill. Come back when you have questions, and we can continue to grow together on this path.
Hey, my name is Wilco. I'm from ASML. I have a quick question. I'm playing around with the idea to hire people that have a skill gap and just create some sort of like academy kind of thing. Do you have experience or advice for me that I could use for this?
I do. I can talk to you a little bit offline about this, but there are a lot of companies and organizations that are looking at this problem, and what they do is they create fellowship programs. And so I paused a little bit because I'm like, I'm not sure. We could talk about this because Capital One does this. We have a program called the Cybersecurity Development Program. And what it is it's a person's first job in cyber, no matter where you're coming from, and it's a 2-year role. And so what you can do is you apply for this job and you come into cybersecurity, and your first year you spend it doing one type of cyber, one flavor of cyber, because there's many of them. And then we rotate you on the second year to do another flavor of cyber, and then you get to pick what you like and you get to stay. It's a full-time job, so you're not working for free. You get benefits, you're a Capital One employee, but I've seen this approach applied in a bunch of different organizations. My previous organization, Yahoo, created a technology organization-wide mentorship program and fellowship program as well to help move software engineers to security people. So it's just getting consensus, getting enough people to want to do it, and then leveraging the existing tools you have to actually do it. So,
I'll stay around a little bit.
yeah, absolutely.
I had a similar question, similar to her. When people are changing their fields, like for example, I have a background in neuroscience, neurobiology. I was a product manager, senior product manager. So I was somewhere like in mid-career level. And right now, when I want to break into cyberspace, you look at entry-level jobs and they have like this big. And so you don't understand like whether you should apply for entry-level jobs or you should apply for mid-career jobs. And there is also, to be honest, there is like a lot of hesitance among people like who don't have like a direct background in this, for people like finance, people from like biology, that, oh, like, should I even apply for this? Or if I apply, should I apply for entry level, even though I was like a mid-level person? So I would love to know your like thoughts on that.
Apply, always apply.
Yeah, apply anyway.
That's going to be our answer, is apply
Yeah,
anyway.
and aim high, right? Because the worst they can say is no, and then you move on, right? That was kind of my strategy, is you just keep applying, keep trying for what you want to achieve, and let that be your guiding factor, is what do I want to do instead of what am I qualified to do, if that makes sense, because of the way the jobs are. I would aim for what you're looking for and then try to communicate that to the people that are hiring, because they can at least respond and tell you what they're looking for in an applicant, so that if there's something specific that they want, you can work toward that, or you can demonstrate that you have that skill.
And if you found a job that like you fell in love with this job, but you don't see like, I don't have Python or I don't have this, take some of the experience that you do have and see if it meets a core competency, and then reach out to either the hiring manager or the recruiter and say, I don't have Python, but I have done this previously in my career, which achieves the same result. And then I think you said you did something in neuroscience?
Yeah, neuroscience.
So there's actually emerging fields of cyber. So one is called cyber behavioral engineering, which is teaching people to not be silly on the internet. And then there's another field that's like cyber psychology as well. So these are emerging fields, and that is a way to kind of like fuse what you've done previously with cyber now. So
Excellent.
those would be my advice. Look for roles in those fields.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. We'll be in the room. If you want to have some conversations, hit us up with questions. We're happy to answer them. Thank you.